Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Hannah Israel. I'm the gallery director at Columbus State University, Department of Art, and I'm so excited to be with all of you. A lot of us were here in this in Columbus just 2 weeks ago. Sharing ideas and listening to everyone's work and wishes and hopes for the future of photography. I want to thank SPE Southeast and South Central for being part of this event. And it's been such an amazing experience for me and my colleagues here and our students at Columbus State University. I also would like to thank all of the artists of Off Dawn and Shauna for, bringing in something fresh, something new, and something very thoughtful and very important in how we are discussing future of imagery, identity, who we are, and how we place ourselves in the world today. I'm going to do a quick introduction, nothing like what I did in introduction during the first conversation, but and hopefully it's as thoughtful of introduction of Shauna. And after my introduction, we will definitely Shauna will introduce the artists who are speaking with us today and presenting their work. Thanks, Cara and Mikael, for being with us this evening. So let me just let a few people in that are, there's another 10 people in that I was not seeing in my screen. So thanks, everyone. And just for house rules, while we're listening to the artist talk, if you all can make sure that your microphones are muted. If you have any questions that you want to share with us, please, put them in the chat room and we'll definitely address them. And after the artist presents their work in the conversation, we will have some time for questions and answers. And also for the students who are participating with us tonight, thank you for already, you all are so smart for putting in your name and your 909 number in the chat room. I'll definitely be keeping track on that. And thank you. And I hope you all get something out of this. And please make sure for the students, I encourage you to ask questions. We have two dynamic artists that are participating tonight and would probably want to hear your thoughts about the exhibition that all of you have seen in the gallery. So, okay, we have more joining in. So sorry. It's funny while I'm talking and driving, I feel like the karaoke driving, series and trying to manage everything. So I want to do an introduction. First, it's been such a pleasure working with Shauna in this exhibition. I've worked a lot with in my career here. I've been a gallery director for 17 years at Columbus State University, and working with Shauna has been such a pleasure, but also she's opened some doors of things that I've never thought before in how we communicate with artists and how we think about art in general. And I find myself as a curator myself and an artist, being able to grow with people who enter my space. And so I want to thank you, Shauna, for giving me that opportunity to introduce me to artists, and new artists that have brought some new thoughts in my own practice. And so I thank you for that. But to some of you who is would like to know a little bit more about Shauna. Shauna is an artist, an educator, a curator, and a scholar. She lives and works at the in Boone, North Carolina. And she's works in multimedia and photographic process. She is also, her work is focused on honoring land, familiar connections, sacred relationships, and transformation. And her practice also explores collaborative opportunities. And part of the things that I find in her work that's very interesting is her focus on artists, not just beyond the her environment, but also she in her own practice as a curator, she focuses a lot of in Appalachian artists, and which is something that I really commend. Focusing on your community is really important, making sure that your community is being heard. So she received her BFA in studio art in her art education master's from with Appalachian Studies at the Appalachian State University, where she also exhibits and has exhibited and curated. And her work can also have been shown locally, nationally, and internationally. So thank you so much, Shauna, for bringing in these artists, and thanks to all the artists for being part of Columbus State University.
Thank you so much, Anna. You're so kind, and it's been such an incredible opportunity to work with you on this show. And I'm so excited to be in service of the incredible artists who are part of the exhibition. And I am so passionate about your work and your messages, and I'm really excited to hear from you both today, Cara and Mikael. And I'm excited to introduce you to the audience. It looks like we have a pretty big group here, so it's going to be lovely, and hopefully we'll have some great conversation afterward. And first, I'll introduce Cara. So Cara Romero is an enrolled citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe. Cara is a visual storyteller, activist, and mother. Born to interracial parents in Los Angeles, she grew up between the reservation and big city sprawl. She's known for dramatic fine art photography that examines Indigenous life in contemporary contexts. As an undergraduate at the University of Houston, she pursued a degree in cultural anthropology and was disillusioned by how Native Americans are portrayed in academia and media. After realizing that photographs could do more than anthropology did in words, she shifted her medium. With training in film, digital, photojournalism, editorial portraiture, and commercial and fine art photography, her work is shaped by 25 years of formal study and artistic practice. Blurring the lines between fine art and activism, she tells stories of cultural memory, collective histories, and autobiography. Her work commonly explores themes of environmental racism, power, and belonging of Native women, Native sub-pop, and mythos. Her work continues to grow and evolve. Her imagery, which ranges from pointed satire to the supernatural in everyday life, conveys the complex realities of contemporary Native peoples. Her work has been acquired by major institutions, including the Met, the MoMA, the Amon Center, the Amon Carter, as well as the Forge Project collection. Over the past 3 years, she's been commissioned to create monumental scale public art, including the 2019 Desert X Biennial and Indian Collective's Tongvaland billboard series in Los Angeles, which I had the wonderful opportunity to see in person and was maybe my first virtual interaction with you, Cara. But since 2017, she's mentored 4 emerging Native American women photographers in her studio. And as a mother of 3 children, she travels between Santa Fe and the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation, where she inherited her childhood home and maintains close ties to her tribal community and ancestral homelands through art and activism. So thank you so much, Cara, for being here with us this evening. And I'm excited to introduce to you Mikael Owunna, who is a Nigerian-American multimedia artist, filmmaker, engineer, and president of the City of Pittsburgh's Public Art and Civic Design Commission. He also co-founded Rainbow Serpent Incorporated, a Black LGBTQ art nonprofit organization, exploring the intersections of technology, art, and African cosmologies. His work seeks to elucidate an emancipatory vision of possibility that revives African knowledge systems and pushes people beyond all boundaries, restrictions, and frontiers. Owunna's work has been exhibited across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, and has been collected by institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Nasher Museum of Art, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Middlebury College Museum of Art, Equal Justice Initiative, Duke University, Pratt School of Engineering, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Mississippi Delta Health Center, and National Taiwan Museum. His work has also been featured in media, ranging from the New York Times to CNN, NPR, Vice, and The Guardian. He's lectured at venues including Harvard Law School, World Press Photo, Tate Modern, and TEDx. Owunna has published 2 monographs, Limitless Africans and Cosmologies, and his multimedia practice includes film and live performance. Thank you so much, Mikael, for being here with us. Both of you, I'm so excited to hear more about your practice. We're going to hear from Cara first, who will share a slideshow and a talk about her work, and then we'll hear from you, Mikael, but I'll hand it over to you, Cara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shauna, and for everyone for joining in. It's an honor to be co-presenting with Mikael, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that look okay? So this is the landscape that I'm from. I was born to interracial parents in Los Angeles in the late 70s, and our reservation had been reorganized in the Mojave Desert, and my grandmother and her cousins initiated a reorganization of lands that were on the California side of Lake Havasu. So we had been flooded out of our traditional valley through the damming of the Colorado River, and had left the area for a very long time, about 40 years before my grandmother and her cousins decided to move back. So it's deep in the heart of the Mojave Desert. It is a beautiful wild landscape. We grew up really close to nature. It's the second most biodiverse ecosystem in the world behind the rainforests, and it is a massive geography that Chemehuevis have inhabited across vast areas for a very, very long time. When I left the reservation, my parents divorced in the 80s, and I went back and forth between my mom's family and my dad's family, which was a bicultural experience. It was rural versus city. It was native versus non-native. And one of the things that I learned really early on is that kids in the big city really had no idea of what modern Native American life was like, and the lived experience really didn't match up at all with what was taught in school from a very early age, which was, I think, exhausting in some ways, but also intriguing, right? It was a firsthand experience into erasure of story, erasure of history, which is, you know, an act of cultural genocide against peoples. It's kind of textbook. I didn't realize that at the time, but what I did realize was that I always wanted to be able to illustrate for people, you know, what was going on, what we lived like, who we were, you know, that we were living in a reservation era, you know, all across the United States, right here in our backyard, and sometimes, you know, an urban experience in the cities. And I thought my pathway to be able to do that would be in Native studies, and as, you know, maybe writing textbooks, or, you know, being a professor in Native studies. And as, luck would have it, I stumbled into a black and white photography class in the late 90s and had one of those instructors that really changed my life. And his name was Bill Thomas. And we began to learn how to, just the basics of black and white film, but I had never picked up a camera before. And it was something that was not really afforded to me, growing up. And I had to borrow a camera to take my very first class, but he emphasized content over technical ability. And that was, I think, a key and pivotal moment for me as a young person, because while I needed a lot of time to catch up technically, I just had a lot to say and found the visual communication of photography. So I was just so in love with it from the very beginning. I was in love with the way that I could show my friends and my family in a light that I had never seen before, that I really opened up a lot of doors, intellectually for me. And so I ran off to art school in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe is home to the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is the only tribal arts college in North America. So we come from reservations and urban settings throughout North America here to Santa Fe on scholarship to study arts formally. One of the really interesting things for me early on is that because there were not a lot of Native American people making photographs from within culture, we were emulating what was out there. And I think one of the very first major, existential crises or epiphanies for me as a young person was that this very early work often emulated the ethnographic photographers of the turn of the century, right? So they were in black and white, they were often devoid of modern context. And so I was kind of perpetuating this, mystic stereotype of Native people. And while the photographs were very beautiful, they were disingenuous to what I had set out to do, which was, to document our modernity. And so everything had also switched over to digital right around this time. And so I doubled down and went back to school for a digital au revoir of commercial photography and commercial lighting. And while I didn't know what I was doing at the time, often we don't as young people, I think following your heart can often just really be key. And all of those different styles and different psychologies of lighting and psychologies of style, and learning the medium in so many different ways, I was able to come through with kind of my own voice that began to work in color, to work with lighting that had effects of like elevating the status of the people, telling people psychologically that we're of modern people. They began to have sense of humor, authentic voice, an experience that was really genuine to myself and my friends and my family, which is something that I still really participate in, is working with, we kind of joke, like this repertory of friends and families. So they'll often be the same cousins or, dear friends that I love working with that show up as themselves and these other characters that we can relate to as modern Native people living here in Santa Fe and really living across the United States, right? And so their stories, pop culture is a way, it's a way to communicate, to cross-culturally in a really kind of simple way, visually. Here again, these ideas that we're modern and that we're astute in pop and, all types of culture, that we're astute in Western civilization and biblical stories. And of course, we also have to study Western art, and so I'm just really kind of bridging that psychologically. And I think ultimately, really wanting to gift humanity back to our community that, you know, has so often from outside of the culture been dehumanized or othered, you know, is something that we really talk about a lot, and give breadth to stories and ways that we've been stereotyped, and, you know, just kind of shatter those. You can do it so instantly with art. You can shatter stereotypes, you can check people's preconceived notions about, you know, who your community is and what ideas they may have about them. You can begin to tell lots of different stories and really counter what, you know, we often talk about the one stereo or one story narrative, that we're a monolithic people when we're incredibly diverse with, you know, incredibly diverse experiences. And I really have a lot of fun also speaking to, in Native America, we have oral tradition. So often, you know, histories have not been transcribed, or they've been told by the conqueror, right? And so we have so many stories that we talk about what it was like for us, for the railroad to come through the West, and what westward expansion was like, and how it changed our art forms and how it changed our ways of living. But this is not stories that we hear otherwise. So I really enjoy visually, you know, maybe reminding myself and speaking to my own community. And I would say so much of the work is really in conversation with my own community. Like Shauna said, this idea of environmental racism and stories untold in US history are really important for me to evoke and tell through photography. So that, you know, gifting that humanity back to community so that people can understand how we arrived, you know, in these contexts that we now live in, right? So without all of the last 120, you know, sometimes 200-300 years of stories, you know, it's very quizzical of, you know, how people ended up on reservations where they're living on oil economy, or they've been flooded out of their homelands for hydroelectric energy. And all of these stories, you know, they combine with you know, mythos that has been passed through time for our communities to continue to tell. I grew up in a community where matriarchy, where women in leadership was very normal, that gender equity was very normal. Young women were allowed to speak up, to take up space, to feel empowered from a very young age. It was something that was, I understand now, very unique to my place in the universe. And so I think I really like to, I think we all work in autobiography as artists. So, you know, there's a lot of autobiography in my empowered women that show up taking a really strong central role, that have supernatural ability, that, you know, carry a lot of medicine and life-giving ability. You know, creating a world that we wish existed, you know, in representation, and that people understood, you know, the intricacies of our regalia and our artwork, and the interconnections between our indigenous high arts as they relate to place-based art and ecosystem art. So each one of our types of regalia are incredibly diverse and connect back to the specific bioregions and ecosystems that we're from, you know, that carry through in different vernacular from each of our different communities. And so these are all things that I just love to express because I can't find them anywhere else, you know, and I like to write about them, and I like to, you know, work with my community and, you know, tell stories. We're so diverse, but often our struggles are parallel, you know, and so I work often very intertribally. Indigenous futurism, Afrofuturism, Latin futurism, all of it is a very exciting time for me to come through these stories of survivance and be imagining ourselves in healthy futures and examining, you know, what it's going to take for us to be happy in the future. I think the common thread with so many of my futurism pieces is we're slow growth cultures, and taking very, very old things or original instructions or things that have been around for a very, very long time, that for Indigenous peoples, the quickness of technology, the advancement of humans doesn't happen unless we have the very first principles in place. So things like our design work that have come through time for a very long time. In her sunglasses, they're dancing really, really old dances that they've danced in her woodlands for a very long time. We're dancing in different atmospheres. We've brought our corn with us far into the future, right? So our climate and our ecosystem have to be in place. I'm gonna just show this video very quickly so that you can kind of see a little bit of process. So that video is put together by my Choctaw buddy, Wes Cunningham, and you can kind of see how much is done in camera. So we strung up all of the corn with fishing line to give the final image. I'm going to go through the last slides just very quickly and talk a little bit about cultural landscape, and our inseparableness from landscape is a theme that emerges for me also in kind of speaking to the importance of the health of environment to Indigenous peoples, and of story of future generations on pathways of experience of development in our landscapes, impacts of resource extraction. Here again, environmental racism is a really good thing for us to be able to tell, because it's not told easily in other places, and art has this ability to disarm audience and be able to speak to people about multiple things at the same time. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. I'm sorry I went a little over, Mikael.
Thank you so much, Cara. That was incredible. And virtual clap. Mikael, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's a great to meet you all and to be in conversation. Cara, your work is so beautiful. It's really exciting to have this conversation about, imagining a radical and alternative future and collective future for all of us. And so it's really exciting to see the work that's been put into this exhibition. Thank you, Shauna, for your thoughtfulness in the curation. Thank you, Hannah, for hosting us and hosting this conversation. So I'm going to share my screen. Well, sometimes the technology wants to work, sometimes it doesn't want to work. So I feel like I'm sharing my screen. It's all working. Okay, fantastic. But again, thank you all so much. So my practice, I really work at the intersection between art, technology, and African cosmologies. And so the base of my artistic practice is photography, but it also is extended, from my starts in photography, it's also extended now into as wide as film, live performance, upcoming sculptural work, virtual reality. So really thinking about using any and every medium possible as a way to revive endangered African knowledge systems that showcase a really sacred and divine understanding of Blackness and queerness. And so I'm going to just go through this presentation, hopefully as quickly as possible, just to kind of show you all the range of my artistic practice. And so some of my photography work, so, some people will look at this work and not realize that it's a photograph. And so I create my work I begin by hand painting the bodies of my models with fluorescent paints. And I actually studied engineering in college. And I built my own camera flash that only transmits ultraviolet light. And so in total darkness in my studio, I click down on the shutter, and for a fraction of a second, the model's bodies are illuminated in the cosmic patterns that you see here. Each of my pieces references specific myths from the archive of the African diaspora. And so, for example, this piece is part of a series that's dedicated to a West African Igbo myth of the creation of the universe, which comes from my own ethnic group in Nigeria, which was really interesting because when I spoke to my own family members who grew up in Nigeria, they had never heard any of our creation stories. The only creation myth that they know is of Adam and Eve. And so the work is also about reviving these endangered knowledge systems. And so this piece is entitled The Martyrdom of Eke Netchukwu. And so in the Igbo myth, at the beginning of the universe, all was one in the primordial androgynous blackness of space. And then there was the masculine polarity of the cosmos, Chukwu, and the feminine polarity, Eke Netchukwu. And they existed in total harmony in this blackness of space until Chukwu sectioned off a corner of space exclusively for himself. Eke Netchukwu became curious to see what was happening inside of Chukwu's chamber. She enters into the chamber, and during one moment, a huge explosion rips through and shatters the fabric of the universe. This explosion also martyrs her in the process. And so this piece is entitled The Martyrdom of Eke Netchukwu. As Chukwu exits his chamber, finds her body, and he begins to weep over her. As Chukwu cries, his tears pour down upon her, and in one spectacular moment, they purify, they heal her, and Eke Netchukwu rises from the dead. And as she rises from the dead, the entire physical universe on which we exist today is born on her body. And so here in this image, you can see the divine tears of Chukwu raining down upon her and bringing her back to life. And you can see her body holding the memory of what happened right before the explosion as she was spinning the cosmic cotton, which forms the cosmic threads, the cosmic strings of all creation. And as she was, her foot arched as she was sneaking into Chukwu's chamber. And here you can see the culmination of the series. On the left, after Eke Netchukwu is resurrected, she then is transfigured into the goddess Komosu, which means the body of the goddess, because now resurrected form is now the entirety of the physical universe. And so you see Eke Netchukwu resurrected as Komosu on the left, holding the totality of the universe on her colossal form. Chukwu, on the other hand, after the colossal explosion and the resurrection of Eke Netchukwu, never fully recovers from the traumatic shock of the event. He shuts himself into his own sacred chamber and closes the door of mercy behind himself. And so again, the work is really thinking about these different knowledge systems, engaging with the past to then reimagine an alternative vision of of creation, of the Black body, and the source coming from this primordial androgynous blackness of space, as it's described within our African cosmological traditions. Here you all can see a bit of behind the scenes of the process. So on the right there, I am with my camera flash that I built, and the model's bodies are painted, but the paints are not really visible in the visible spectrum. And so again, I click down on my shutter, and then for a fraction of a second, that beam of ultraviolet light interacts with the paints on the model's bodies. The paints absorb the energy of the ultraviolet light. There's then a step change in energy, and a portion of that energy is then released in the visible spectrum, which then is then captured onto the camera sensor. And so the work also thinks about how within the visible spectrum, we have all of these systems of oppression and specifically anti-Blackness that have been created. But when we move beyond what's visible to the human eye alone, because ultraviolet light is invisible, we see the Black body illuminated as the divine cosmic source of all life, as it is described within our African cosmological traditions. And so this works were collected into my second monograph, Cosmologies, and have also served as the basis for a whole number of other multimedia explorations as well. And so in the Of Dawn exhibition, which is on view until November 11th, so please check it out if you've not already, I have on view my first film. And so the film is an extension of the visual style of the photographs. Again, the entire scene is illuminated under ultraviolet light, and it retells the myth that I just shared of Chukwu and Eke Netchukwu, this Igbo creation myth. So I will share the trailer with you all just to kind of show you all a bit of the visual feel. And the overall film is a 30-minute experimental dance film. And so this is the trailer. And so for the piece, collaborated with Marcus Red, who is a collaborator of mine. We work on many, many projects together, and we worked with a group of Black queer performers, dancers, production, that are really thinking about how these African cosmological systems provide a whole alternative framework for us to imagine and think about Black queerness as being at the heart of creation itself. And so the film debuted in 2021 and has been touring the country, including MIT Media Lab, North Carolina Museum of Art, Stanford University. Here is a sneak peek of how it looks at in the gallery at Columbus State. So please check it out between now and November 11th. It's also been my work has also been, just kind of show you all where the work has traveled to. My work has been part of exhibitions, including at the Ford Foundation Gallery. This is at Utopian Imagination, again, thinking about these utopian futures. This is a current installation at the North Carolina Museum of Art. So if anybody is in Raleigh between now and the end of 2024, there's a large scale installation of the film there. And then we also rebuilt the sacred pillar from the film in the space, used a African artifact from the collection, a Dogon sacred door, as the entrance to this sacred threshold into the space, and then also paired it with digital animations of my work as well. And so the work just kind of show you how now it's expanded into many different media as well. So this has included NFTs and digital animations, which take some of my images and then pair them with my research into pre-colonial African writing systems. And so you can see this image of Imikozo, who is a Dogon female priestess, fusing with a pre-colonial Dogon writing system for a symbol for the star Sirius B, which she made observations of in the mid-1950s. And so again, this research process in reviving African knowledge systems through all of these new technological formats. Here is a showcase of some of the digital animations at Art Dubai in 2022. And so this is taking an image of Amma, which is the divine androgynous creator god in Dogon cosmology, and fusing it with the pre-colonial symbol for Amma from the Dogon writing system. So other showcases of the work, really thinking about how do we bring these alternative visions to a widest audience as possible. This has included public art showcases. This was a 60-foot by 20-foot mural that I created for the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. Also, just earlier this year, if anybody's in Pittsburgh between now and March, also unveiled a 91-foot by 27-foot mural installation at the Andy Warhol Museum entitled Anatomy of the Human, also grounded in African cosmologies. Part of a current exhibition around Afrofuturism at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So anybody's there between now and March 2024, there's a lot of really amazing work there, work by George Clinton, Sun Ra, a lot of people who really inspired me. So that's a really amazing exhibit to check out too. And just to give you all a sneak peek of some of my upcoming new photography, my new series, Anatomy of the Human, is a current body of work that I'm exploring. This one explores the understanding of the human soul from the perspective of African cosmologies. And so within African cosmological traditions, we don't just have a physical body, we exist simultaneously on multiple dimensional planes of existence. And so, for example, in the Igbo tradition in Nigeria, we have 4 spiritual bodies. These are the Chi, Eke, Agu, and Mua. And so we simultaneously exist on these 4 dimensional planes of existence and 3 of which are immaterial. And so the thought and the challenge was, how do you showcase the multiple souls of the human body all simultaneously? And so use the same base of the ultraviolet photography that I've been working with and developing, and then also paired with long exposures, so that as the model moved through the space over the course of 10 seconds, 20 seconds, shooting multiple flashes of ultraviolet light, was able to then capture all of their souls in one frame. So that's the new body of work, just to give you all a preview of what's coming up. And also have been working with a larger collective of Black LGBTQ artists. And so the thought is, really how do we, beyond just being an individual artist, we have to really work collectively, because we're in a culture which is really kind of spinning out of control. So we have to kind of work collectively to overcome this and heal the psychic damage that's happening to our communities. And so my collaborator, Marcus Red, and I, who co-directed the film, Obi Umbu, we co-founded a Black LGBTQ art nonprofit entitled Rainbow Serpent. And so our mission is really to advance Black LGBTQ culture through really this intersection of emerging technologies, advanced healing protocols, African cosmology and multimedia art, really expanding on that mission. And so we've been doing that across a really variety of formats. This has included healing retreats based in African ritual practice. So for example, the film Obi Umbu, which you can see at the gallery, we then actually use that as a template to create a whole series of African ritual practices that people could use to heal themselves and transform their lives. And so that's a retreat that we host based on the artistic work in African cosmologies. We've also hosted dance healing workshops, other workshops based in African spirituality. We've curated events for Black and LGBTQ artists. So this is a Juneteenth celebration event that we hosted in Pittsburgh featuring 25 Black artists for Juneteenth. So again, thinking about how do we build a pipeline for Black and LGBTQ artists. And we've also created artistic works too. And so this has included a new series that we've been working on, a collaborative series with the Rainbow Serpent Collective of artists, Black LGBTQ artists, entitled The Four World Ages. And so for this work, it's the sequel to Obi Umbu. So Obi Umbu showcases the creation of the universe from the perspective of Igbo myth. And so this series is thinking about, okay, the history of humanity after the creation of the universe, starting with the first human beings and continuing to the present day. And so this is manifested as a photography series, as you can see here, where we actually took research into pre-colonial writing systems, again, from the African continent. And so these are mystic ideograms from a southeastern Nigeria, known as Nsibidi. And so we're reviving these pre-colonial writing systems surrounding the figures and these Black queer figures in this cosmic mystic framework from the past to envision a new future. We also hosted our first live performance this summer. I'm not going to show you all the trailer, it'd be too long, I'm trying to keep it short, but you can check it out on my website too. But for the performance, it's also been featured on billboards. So this is a large scale 60-foot billboard that's in Atlanta. And the performance itself also incorporates spatial augmented reality, which tracks the motion of the dancers in real time. And so here you can see just some snapshots from the live performance. This is an evening length work that we hosted on Martha's Vineyard this summer, again, starting with the age of unity, going into the age of separation where the first human being dies. Then you have this age of the great civilizations like in ancient Egypt, but then we have the rise of warfare and environmental destruction. And our current age within Igbo cosmology is the age of suffering and chaos, where everything that's developed from a technological perspective is ultimately used to destroy. And so again, you can see how we're using the framework of the body painting, but also using multimedia projections, technology as a way to envision this new future. And at the end of this mythical sequence, it's described that spiritually enlightened individuals will arise that will lead us all collectively back into the next age of divine unity. So that's some of the live performance work that we've been doing. And just a quick preview, we've also been doing glass sculptures. We have an upcoming exhibition next year, May 3rd, 2024 at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. We're creating a series of 16 glass sculptures of Black queer deities from our research into African spiritual systems. And so again, we're basing it in the formal style of ancient Egyptian statuary and just giving you all a quick look at some of the work. So again, these are all glass from the busts themselves to the headdresses. The busts are done with kiln casting techniques. And so these are all representing different deity figures. This, for example, is Khonsu, the moon deity. The head pieces are done as blown pieces. This is Nu, the primordial androgynous Black waters that create the universe. And we worked with 16 Black queer models, again, for this work, to again, think about how do we connect ourselves in the present to these ancestral traditions as a way to envision a new future. This work will also be a part of a larger virtual reality experience we're also developing. So this is just a quick snapshot. We're doing 3D modeling of the sculptures as well, trying to build a virtual world of these Black queer deities as too. So that's my presentation. Excited to be in conversation. And thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much. What an absolute treat. I'm so excited to talk more with both of you and to see new work that you're bringing forth is incredible. So thank you again so much for sharing. I would love to dive in a little deeper. I'm really inspired by this idea of collective imagining as this avenue for a radically liberated future. And I feel like each of your work so beautifully illustrates that in really deeply intimate world building and provocative representations of these archives and cultural memories. And I wonder, how do you relate to the idea of the imagination as a source of liberation, as both artists who are utilizing your own imaginative capacity alongside your work as change makers and mentors and performers that nourish the imaginations of your audiences through the work that you do? How do you feel that imagination plays into our path forward and all of these worlds that we're breathing into?
I'll go first. um, I guess imagination for me is a deep relation to inner child and really caring for inner child. Um, I think each person has their own unique creative process. That's like, sometimes we call it muse, but it's certainly a spiritual relationship with something larger than self, whether that's collective consciousness, intermingling with your own subconscious. I think there's a deep amount of faith that I give to my imagination. And I think that there is kind of a breakthrough for me as an artist, that when I'm in deep trust with things that are present for me in my mind's eye, and we're in that creative process of building upon what we're imagining and trying to bring that into real space through art. I feel like there's no like better pursuit that I've ever experienced in my life. And just in that purity of relationship is probably the most important part of the whole process. I think that once you're in that state, the end result is, more based in like practice and, honing in on craft and skill. But it's that imagination that when you're truly able to relate to your own imagination, it always turns out right, if that makes sense. It's like in a deeply vulnerable space. And the more vulnerable you are as an artist with your imagination, it seems like the more you can connect with other people, and more people feel deeply connected to what's going on in your work.
Yeah, I agree, Cara, about the importance of imagination, the power it has in terms of its impact, particularly for artists. I I think, I also, think about from the perspective of African cosmologies, the space of the imagination is also a space of trance. And so the space of, thinking about trance as an induced state that can influence our perception and experience of reality itself. And so that can be both positive and negative, in many negative ways, in terms, particularly in the way in which our culture influences our experience. And so I think about the collective trance we're in that, limits our own individual imagination of what is possible for ourselves, for society, for the organization of the world, for social structures, for what our bodies can and cannot do. And I think about the way in which artwork and artists we can create images and a guide to that people can use to focus their mind on that this other image, to expand their horizons of what is possible itself, of what reality in the world and the universe can and really is, like in terms of its really overabundance of possibility in terms of all dimensions of existence. And so I think also about that in terms of public artwork, in terms of as we go through the world every single day, we're really bombarded with these messages of, you know, capitalism, white supremacy every single day. We're just walking through the world. We're being bombarded by these images, which are again influencing our collective imagination, this collective trance that we're in. And so I think about the way in which, you know, the artwork that I try to do, particularly in public spaces, but in galleries as well, can be an intervention around the imagination, an intervention around how people can see our collective humanity in an alternative way, in a much larger way too. So I think it's a really, that is a really important battlefield, you know, because I think there's really this, you know, Lauryn Hill described, you know, there's a war in the mind. And I think that is part of the warfare that's happening against us every single day.
I love that way of thinking about it as an intervention, you know, incredible. And I really appreciate how both of your practices extends beyond the bounds of visual arts, and, you know, through your work with pioneers, Cara and Mikael, through Rainbow Serpent. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you dovetail those projects and how it influences your work as an artist to also be so immersed in activist practice and movement.
So the main focus of my work at Pioneers is producing the Indigenous Forum annually, and other different forums where Indigenous people from, you know, global perspectives really, but often from North America, come together to speak about contemporary issues, or, you know, highlight best practices and things that are working in their communities, you know, successes. And in that way, it really speaks to creating connections. You know, we're often from isolated communities and seeking connection to each other. I think that that's something for Native people that is a problem that we've had to work around in the last, you know, hundreds of years, is becoming forcefully isolated from each other, not being able to share information. Sharing conversations and dialogues around amazing different things that are going on, I get to learn. And I think inspiration comes from those learnings often, and it feeds into the imagination and the inspiration to create the artwork, to hear stories about people doing amazing things in community, and ways that people have learned to articulate about really deeply difficult subject matter continue to inspire me.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Rainbow Serpent, we are really thinking about how to build, you know, infrastructure and a pipeline for Black LGBTQ artists who are really thinking about this way in which art, when it's integrated with, you know, emerging technologies and African cosmologies, can be a way to, you know, transform and heal the world itself. And so we are, you know, I think it's had a huge influence on my own work. You know, the film that's on view at the gallery was the first Rainbow Serpent production, for example. And that really emerged, the collective emerged really organically during the pandemic. Marcus and I created a book group for Black queer people to learn about African cosmologies. And one of the stories we read was this really poetic narrative of these two deities that emerge from the primordial androgynous blackness of space and create the entire universe through dance. And we were like, oh, you know, these narratives of blackness, these narratives of queerness, a whole new pantheon really is being carved out here. And we, you know, worked with the dancers, the choreographer, to create the work. And then it's led to live performances, it's led to the sculpture series. And so really, I think really about I don't really even think about myself really as an individual artist. I see myself as really being a part of this collective of Black queer artists that we're forming with Rainbow Serpent, who are really trying to, build this alternative future, through the arts and in particular. And so it's really become integral and part of all aspects of my artistic practice. Really has come back to these collaborations with other Rainbow Serpent artists. So it's been really rich and really exciting. And so yeah, if people are curious, you can also check out on my website, or the rainbowserpent.org is our website too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to open space if there are questions you have for each other, if you have anything that you'd like to bring into the conversation.
I have a question, Cara, for you. So it was really exciting. I mean, first, thank you. I love your work so much. I was really excited about the work that has these themes of mysticism that also come into it. And I was curious if there were particular indigenous cosmological traditions that you were researching or in conversation with, or as a kind of more of a general exploration of spirituality from an indigenous context. So really excited to learn more about that, the spirituality aspects that go into the work.
So I definitely connect with your work in that way also. And I think, when I was really addressing this idea of linear time and what we speak to in our community as our indigeneity, right, is it's often something that we talk about living in two worlds, right? And I was very interested, I think initially, in expressing how do we express our spirituality in the now, so that it would counter this idea of, this forced stereotype as Indigenous peoples that if you are not the mystic, stoic, native person that has captured the world's imagination of 120 years ago, then you're therefore not valued, right? And so I was really looking at ways of appropriate ways to share spirituality, because we're also beholden to very strict cultural protocols and cultural privacy about what we can share and what we can't share. And so I was looking at ways that mythos appear as like supernatural in everyday life, or how people carry mythos through their bodies and through their cultural and artistic practice through time. So it was very much coming from, creation stories like yours, and also from shared stories. What I've found just living as a person, not necessarily like doing research, is just we have coyote stories all throughout the Southwest, and probably, up into the woodlands, that he's this fabled character and trickster that appears when, he's about to make a mistake, he's about to teach a lesson. So when he shows up, it's time to take pause. Or the girl with the flying hair is about clay woman, a deity of the clay and of pottery. And so the young woman that is portrayed is a clay artist. And so it's speaking to how clay woman has come through her as a vessel, and all of the metaphors as woman, as vessel, and those types of things. So in that way, we're, definitely in simpatico. I could stare at your images and listen to your stories all day long. And I have had the opportunity to hear some of them, but there's something about the medium of photography and what you've done that really just, takes this imaginative moment and like makes it this hyper real, connection all at once. And I love that. I know that was one of your questions, Shauna, about photography, and I think it is that that ability to make something real, that is like you said, from 4 different spirits, and from different universes and cosmologies all at once. That's the stuff that really interests me so much, and obviously you too. It's really exciting.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, and it's exciting to hear the stories behind it too. So it gives me even more context around those pieces. I love them.
Yeah.
And it looks like we have time for maybe one last question. And I love what has emerged in the chat from Maura. And Maura asks, what advice would you give to young artists striving to share their cultural background and identity living in a trend-driven society?
I think one of the things that I always, photography and sometimes the expense of art is, I think, a number one reason that kids from communities of color quit. And I think that it is a major, like, to overcome, like, learning to invest in yourself and your practice is like this radical act of self-care, and your ideas of wanting to share cultural background and stories of identity are important. They're worth all the savings, and they're worth all of the hard work, far more than any of the trends that society is driving. So I would say to go into it wholeheartedly with this idea that the universe will give back. I think there's no finer pursuit than art, and I don't think that that's something that we get told enough. I always, when people ask that question, like, what could you tell your younger self? I'm like, you're doing the right thing. Like, it's gonna be okay. I think a lot of times when we're young artists, there's a lot of doubt that's cast on using your imagination in the world, you know what I mean, and holding on to that inner child and all of those things. So I would also say, like, working with culture and identity specifically, that we often as artists of color are not working in ego, allowed to just do whatever we want, that we're, whether we like it or not, representing our often communities of color, our entire race. Sometimes it feels like. So I think that cultural protocol and cultural sensitivity and cultural privacy and intellectual property are all things to hold at the forefront of your research and your art making, so that you're not doing anything that exploits your own community, like always with the idea of giving back, right? How do you always use artwork and your medium to give back and to not take? And I think that that's two bits of advice that I've kept at my heart all the way through.
Yeah, this is a very important question. I think the first thing I would say is to not give up. I remember actually that I think it was in 2016, and I went, and that was like 7 years ago, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I'm not sure. But I remember I went to a photography conference. I guess kind of like this. It was in DC, and I was in the audience, and there was a Black journalist presenting, and I was like, wow, like how, like I was like, I felt like I was just starting. I really had no idea. I was like, how do you get there? Like, how's that happen? I think I remember her, first saying to the importance of, really believing in yourself and believing in the work that you're doing and continuing to do it, regardless of the trends, continuing to do your work. So I think the first thing is like that perseverance that's so important. I think the second one is, realizing that you already have all of the tools that you need to start, to build bodies of work, to build cultural narratives that are important, that are valuable. I think one of the pieces that we can sometimes get in front of ourselves. We can say like, oh, well, I didn't get the MFA, or I don't have the Canon R5 II, I don't have this, I don't have that. And you can just start with what you have access to. And from there, you can build powerful narratives that are that speak to the heart of the cultural narratives that you're trying to tell. I mean, you could shoot things with an iPhone. You could, borrow a location from from one of your aunts. You can have your cousin model. I had a lot of cousins model. You can go to Joanne Fabrics or just get a sheet, put it up in the backdrop, pull things. I mean, I think it's really about working with what we have versus kind of working from the deficit mindset, because many of us will not have access to the money, the tools, the access to be able to buy all the things that, maybe you go on YouTube and like, oh, to be a photographer, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. You can start with what you have access to, and really focus on what is the story that you're trying to tell. How are you making an intervention in the space that is different than what you see else happening, and also something that will extend beyond what maybe is a current trend. I mean, I think, for example, a current trend is, a lot of Black figurative work. But, it's like, how do you think about, if you are going to do Black figuration, how are you doing it in a different way? How are you extending the narrative? What's the research that you're doing that's kind of approaching it from a different perspective? Are you interested in abstraction? That's something that's very different. Maybe it's not the trend. But I think it's really going into why are you making the work that you're doing? How is it different than what else you see in the space? How is the research that you're doing? How can that also be a part of it? You can also reach out to other artists that are maybe having collectives or looking for interns, and work. I mean, some artists have just reached out to me, and then they do internships with me. So that's also some way that, you can lead to exciting opportunities. But really start with what you have access to, start with your dreams, and don't give up. I think just keep pushing. And yeah, excited to also, if you are interested potentially in internships, you can reach out to me. I had shared my email earlier too. So yeah, definitely just keep going.
Thank you so much. And I know we're a little bit over our hour, so thank you for sharing so much of your time. And thank you everyone in the audience for showing up. This has been really incredible. I'm so honored to share space with all of you. And thank you, Hannah, for organizing and helping us be together this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shauna, for putting this together. Cara, Mikael, Granville, Stephanie, Raven, thank you for sharing your geniuses, your life, and your journey with us. And we really appreciate everything that also put us together here, which is SPE. I can't even thank this group of people that really cares about artists and connection. And so it's been such a great, just to circle around, Amanda and Joshua, who are also in the audience, thank you so much for your leadership. And for everybody who attended tonight, this really means a lot to all of us, to connect us together. I know that there was one question at the end, and I'm going to share that with you, Cara and Mikael and Shauna. It was one of the students who was asking, who asked a question. I know we didn't have enough time. I also want to thank the sponsors for to make this possible: the Mildred Miller Ford Foundation, CSU Friends of Art. Without their their kindness and generosity, things like this wouldn't be possible for us, and to extend things to our students, to grow. So I'm so glad you are all waters and seeds for us here, and I love the connection, and I hope that we all we keep on collaborating in the future. And thanks for extending Columbus, Georgia, to all these places around the in the nation, because I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to connect, and not just through me, but also our students. Some of our students never left Georgia, and this is like a way for us, and a window to extend that. So thank you so much.